the reading that we have today is it's very complicated. Once you start talking about the Garden of Eden and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the Ashwatthama tree, it goes way out there, and we have to really think about what does this mean to us today. But in fact, even the most subtle aspects described in the Gita always can be brought down to something that we know. Swami Kriyananda, among his many very positive attributes as a teacher, was the fact that he could always make a link between that which seemed so far beyond us and something that we already knew. And the Gita is the same way. There's always a bridge. And this is one of the things we have to understand about spiritual teaching, understand even about our own intuition. Swami Kriyananda had more right than anyone I've ever known to claim that he was guided by the Master and that his ideas and initiatives were not just mind-born. They weren't just some ego preference of his. But I almost never heard him say, Master told me, Master wants me to do this is how it should be, this is what God wants. He would always say to us, this is an idea, what do you think? And then he would very methodically and carefully build a bridge between something that might seem a little bit of a stretch to us and what we already knew. This was the art of a teacher, for one thing, because it taught us not only, it taught us how to think, is what I'm really wanting to say. It taught us to ground our spiritual understanding not in dogma, but in something that we could actually stand on, that wasn't just what we were being told. At the same time, let me just a moment here. This has been my habit since I've been here, is that thoughts come and then they disappear again. Oh, yes. One of the classic impossible to answer questions, which we always get, is why did God make creation? And there are several answers that are quite good. Vivekananda's didn't really answer the question, but it did. He said, the level of consciousness that asks the question is not capable of comprehending the answer. Which was actually an answer, but it also silenced all further discussion, which was helpful. The other answer that's classically given is that God wants to enjoy himself through many. But then the obvious fact is that he's not enjoying himself through very many. So somehow the whole experiment was a giant failure, and then why does he continue? Why doesn't he learn from his experience? So all of these are not so helpful. But taking the basic premise that the Sanatana Dharma definition of the divine is Sat Chit Ananda. It's a synonym for the word in English God, but it's a much better word because it speaks of experience. When we say God, we're speaking of some abstraction. And so we end up with all these, we just don't even know what to think. Satchidananda speaks of experience, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy. It also speaks of something that we ourselves would like to have, which is to always, to move out of the ephemeral into the eternal. And it's not enough merely to exist. We need to be aware of our existence. It doesn't do us any good to just be like a piece of furniture that lasts forever. That is nothing to us. But then we want our awareness to be desirable, ever new joy. What could be more than that? That's what we're actually, if you really think about your life, that's what we're always looking for, isn't it? We're looking to establish ourselves in something that will be consistently joy-producing for us. And that's what Satchidananda is. So when you speak of the divine as Satchidananda, then all of a sudden, oh, I know what I'm looking for. And even though still it's not something that from this level of consciousness we can actually grasp, at least it relates to what we can already see. So Swamiji, talking about the divine as being bliss itself, he says it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. And then he uses the simplest kind of example. If you go out and find a restaurant that you really like, that you know that none of your friends know about, what's the first thing you do? Well, nowadays, before you even eat, you take a picture. And before you even finish the meal, everybody in your circle knows about this new restaurant. But in one way or another, it's more enjoyable for you if you can bring others along with you. Isn't that so? It's so simple. So if the divine is the ultimate level of joy, the nature of joy is to want to share itself. So all of a sudden we've taken something that's so far away from us, and now we're thinking about it in terms that, I can understand that. Gives me something to build on. Sister Gyanamata, in one of her letters, she was Master's most advanced woman disciple. In one of her letters, and I'm going to paraphrase, but this is the teaching that she gave. She said it's imperative that we base our spiritual life on something that we actually understand and actually know, and that no part of us rebels against. Rebels against in the sense of repudiating it. Oh, really? That can't be true. When I'm talking about, there's many different planets for us to incarnate on, and just all kinds of things like that. A part of us thinks, yeah, sure. We have no way of knowing. We can't stand on that fact. Now, I can stand firmly on basically anything Yogananda said, and pretty much anything that Swami Kriyananda said. Not because I understand everything that they say, but my life experience has shown me that they know what they're talking about. Swami Kriyananda himself, when he was a young monk, and he knew nothing about yoga, 1948, that was way early in what you might call this East-West unity that we've all lived through more recently. In 1948, he read Autobiography of a Yogi. Everything in there was unknown to him. The words, the idea of guru, the idea of yoga. He said the first time he heard the word yoga, he thought it was yogurt. It's just like he just didn't know what it was that he was experiencing. But he saw Master's picture and he recognized him. Recognized a reality in him that was what he was seeking. Interestingly, this is how Swami described his experience with autobiography. He said he had always felt from his earliest awareness as an incarnated being, as a child, he had always felt that Swami lived in a world that no one else shared. That his just perceptions and his consciousness, and he didn't at that time think it was superior or more elevated, although as a child, when he would lay down to go to sleep, he would see a light in front of him. He would stare into that light, and that light would expand until he merged into it. And that's how he thought everyone went to sleep. It wasn't until much later in his life he found out that wasn't the way it was always done. It's very interesting. Swami Vivekananda, one of Ramakrishna's most prominent disciples, also described the same experience as a child. I only learned that recently. But in countless ways, Swami just felt that his perception of the world was just different than other people's. And actually, as he grew a little older, around the age of 9 or 10, it became a source of great distress for him. Because if everybody else thinks one way and he feels another, it's natural to think maybe the problem is with me, not with the world around me. But when he read Master's book, which would now be some 13 or 14 years later, he said as soon as he started reading that book, he realized that he and Master lived in the same world. Isn't that interesting? Now, all of that would be intuitive because the world that Master described, living in India, being disciples, his parents are disciples of Lahiri Mahashaya, Lahiri Mahashaya materializes in a wheat field. I believe it's on page 9 of that book, to scold Master's father for not letting his employee go to see his guru. It's like a lot of people close the book about that point. I myself, I was very intellectual, and the whole idea of all those miracles and things seemed frivolous to me. Not that they were untrue, I was too austere, and not in a wholesome way. Only after I met Swamiji was I able to pick up Autobiography of a Yogi and think it was glorious, and I couldn't understand why I didn't see it before. I needed his consciousness to translate it for me, is what I would say, vibrationally. So when Swami arrived at Mount Washington, and 5 days after he finished Autobiography of a Yogi, all of it being brand new to him, he's living in the Master's ashram, he's a monk and a disciple, and he said it was all so new that sometimes he would actually be dizzy. He'd have to sort of lean on the furniture because it was such a complete and radical change. And then things were quite disorganized during Master's lifetime. Since Master has passed, everything has become very precise. But that was not at all the way it was when Master was there. Among other things, you see, he had so much magnetism and so much energy. He could hold it all together with his magnetism, because people would be, and he actually deliberately kept it slightly disorganized. He didn't want orderly chains of command. He didn't want everybody reporting here and there. He wanted everything to be tied to him, not for any egoic reason, except that he was the one who was changing people's consciousness, and he had the power to do it. He didn't want anything to interfere. He didn't want other lesser authorities to be coming in between. And so there was a lot of unusual characters at Mount Washington when Swami got there. Master put Swamiji in charge of the monks. I mean, this is 1948. He's been in Mount Washington since 1925, I think. And the monks had never been organized. There'd never been this sort of monastic life. It fell upon Swami to do it. And many of the monks were much older than him and didn't appreciate it at all. So it was an odd and interesting saga. But Swamiji said his experience of Master's consciousness was so compelling that no matter what Master said, he absolutely had to accept it. But he put it like this. He said, I accepted everything Master said unhesitatingly, which there was no part of him that argued and wondered, but not unquestioningly. And he said he was given many opportunities to ask many, many questions of Master and have those questions answered, because he also needed to find a way to make what was said to him his own from the inside and not just from the outside. I was with a group of clergymen. I was invited by some friends of mine who were clergy at that time to be part of a group. And they were, this was about 30, maybe 35 years ago, 20, closer to 40 years ago. Okay, I was more new at what I'm doing now, but I'd never been with a group of clergymen, Christian clergymen. And my whole experience of the spiritual life was driven by my inner need to find a powerful meaning to my life. I certainly wasn't looking for a profession. I wasn't looking for something to belong to. I was looking for truth. That's the simple word for it. So I'm in this group and it was that time it was all men. Nowadays it would be probably 3/4 women, but it was all men, one other woman. And it was Monday, and we were about to have lunch. And so the question was, who among all these clergymen was going to say the grace? They didn't have the little song that everyone would sing. So there was a lot of joking back and forth. And, because we're all clergy, and who's going to do it? It's going to be you, Walter. Is it going to be you, Henry? Is it going to be you, Joe? And like all this. And then finally, somehow it was worked out. And this man starts saying, "Beloved Lord Jesus." And I began to giggle. I thought we were still joking around, deciding who was going to do it. Mamma mia, And then all of a sudden, I turned it into a cough, And I mean, God bless them. There were some very, very fine men in that group. But I realized, oh my gosh, when you start talking to God, you think you have to be somebody else. Especially when you're talking to God in front of a whole group of people. Now we put on our special voice, and we start talking. We would never talk to our kids like this. "Henry, my child," You would never get anywhere as a papa like that, I mean, he wouldn't turn it into a cough. He'd just fall on the floor laughing. When we say the prayer every time, Master set it up a certain way. Father, mother, friend, and beloved is also there. It's hard to make beloved stand alone because we say friend, beloved. But what we're talking about, then we say master. We're talking about what in the Indian tradition are called bhav. Bhav is, there's no English word for it because people who speak English have never really wanted to say these things clearly. We're interested in other stuff. English has so many words, so many more words. Whenever I'm being translated into another language sometimes, even unless they're a native English speaker, my vocabulary gets, and the way I twist the words together sometimes is a little hard for people. But anyway, that's not a problem here, thank God. But when the bhav is the you might call it a mood. It's a very intimate word. It's how I myself feel the divine within me. And here what we're doing is what I was saying that Swamiji has always done, which is, the concept even of Satchidananda, it feels so distant, and it is distant. It's hard for us to, even with human imagination, to know, but we know what love is. There's everything in this world is a small version of the infinite of it. And this is why it's given to us. This is why we have this extraordinary desire to love and be loved. And this is why we're so driven so often to find, romantic partnerships, to find a beloved, and then to have children so that we can selflessly give ourselves. One of my dear friends, and he'd been a yogi for a long time, then he married, he had 2 sons, and he said, I always thought I was kind of an unselfish guy, and it was true. He said, but I had no idea what selflessness really meant until my sons were born. And he said, and then it just means that I matter for nothing. I matter for nothing. The only thing that matters to me is the well-being of those children. It's just, and that's why it's given to us, so that we'll get a clue of what it's like. But also then we feel it. And we can say the word mother, we can say the word father, and it works both ways in human life. If you were blessed to have a wonderful mother or a wonderful father, you can think then. Or if you were deprived of that, you understand the longing for it. So whichever our experience has gone, when we speak father, when we speak mother, it conjures up something for us. And that is not the totality of what the infinite is, but it's a solid ground on which we can stand. And in the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, we find our bhav. We find the mood that really animates our heart. And everybody is different in this. Some people are more, we talk about it in many different ways, but people are inspired in different ways. And so you have father, mother, friend, beloved. This is the Radha Krishna story. Then you have disciple and master. And the last one, which he didn't put in the prayer, because it's so hard for Westerners to understand, is that God is your child. The only time we do that, and we really do it big time, is at Christmas. You know, Christmas is all about the baby Jesus. And one of the reasons the Christmas season is so warm is because we're all excited about the baby. My same friend, after his 2 sons were born, he said, I promised before my children were born I would not be one of those dopey papas who did everything to make his child smile. He said, as soon as my children were born, all dignity went out the window. Whatever would please them, I would do. I didn't care at all. Because that's how the heart feels, isn't it? And you don't have to work to love the baby. You know, we work to love God, but you don't have to work to love the baby. So in the Indian tradition, you'll see there's Krishna and then there's baby Krishna. There's massive Lord Shiva and then there's baby Shiva. And our minds just go, what? But when you really enter into it, and also you see what it gives us is intimacy. Because the death of true devotion is distance. You know, and this is even when people start articulating in the privacy of their own hearts or with their therapists. One of my friends, Fremont, who actually has been here, he has 2 children, a son and a daughter, that he raised at Ananda Village. And he has a very dry wit about him. And he said, yes, both of my children were born and raised at Ananda Village, and they're still talking about it to their therapists every week. Which is not true, but it's very funny in any case. But when we start talking in whatever environment we feel safe, what we want intimacy. And what that means is to take down the barriers. That's what we mean by that. It just means to be in a place where whatever I am can be offered, and I know it will be accepted, and that same trust will be offered back to me. And all of these qualities, you see, are implanted in us by God. The last book that Swami Kriyananda wrote is called Love Perfected, Life Divine. And it's a very interesting, extremely interesting and beautiful book. And it's a novel, and it's a rewrite of somebody else's book that was written and published 100 years ago. There was an author named Marie Corelli. She was a British woman. She was extraordinarily popular in her day. And just in case we think it's important to be popular, nobody knows her anymore. A few 100 years go by, people forget. But she was a very spiritual person and a very imaginative writer. This book originally was called Life Everlasting, and it's a romance, and it's a romance about soulmates. Soulmates in the way that everybody wishes they could have it, you know? And I have to say, Master only ever talked about soulmates once in the romantic sense, because he said if he had talked about it more, everybody would forget about God and just start looking for their soulmate, which is pretty close to what happens anyway, but it would just be even worse if he endorsed it. The only place he talked about it was interpreting the Bible verse, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. And that has been interpreted to mean that divorce is against God's law, but that's not at all what he meant. He said, in fact, we are born, everything in this world is dual, and we actually have somewhere in creation an actual soulmate, but on a level, not on the level of passionate romance. Because, I mean, by the time you have that level of connectedness, you're not compelled by the physical body anymore. And he said, before you attain liberation, you unite with your soulmate. He said, but your soulmate might be on another planet, and you just reunite in vision. It's not how people think of it. Having said that, however, this is a fascinating subject. And this novel that she wrote, Swamiji said, she did a very admirable job, but the subject was bigger than she was. So she wrote it primarily in human romantic terms. But she got lots of it right. And so Swami just rewrote the book using some of her language and a lot of her story to have it be what it really is, which is that what we're all really seeking is union with the divine. And the obstacle to that is within us. Our inability to have perfect love come to us, or to give perfect love, is because of our own obstacles. We are still subject to likes and dislikes and egoic limitation, and that just holds us back. So the story, which is really terrific, is they have met and tried to have their perfect friendship and romance in many different incarnations. It's very colorful and very imaginative, but for some reason they always mess it up. And then he figures out that the problem is within. So he goes off and he finds a master in the most dramatic sense, and he goes and he purifies himself, he becomes strong, many incarnations pass, and then he comes and finds her again. But she realizes that she really now has to change herself before they can have the union that's possible. So she goes off to the master, and it's all love perfected, life divine. It's all absolutely glorious. In Marie Corelli's book, once they perfect their love, they get on this boat, and the two of them sail around together forever. Swami's comment was, any two people who could be all in all to each other, just to each other, must be extraordinarily stupid. It was the word he said. Because it's just insufficient, that's all. But so he changed the ending so that they're more expansive in what they do. The reason I'm saying all of this is really for this single reason. When he was working on that book, and we were talking about the subject of soulmates, he was always very interested in it, Swamiji was. He said that deep within every human heart is the desire not only to be loved impersonally by God, but to be loved personally by another person. Isn't that interesting? And then he said, God would not plant that in our hearts if he didn't intend also to fulfill it. Isn't that interesting? What I'm really trying to say here is there is no bright line of division between that which is spiritual and that which is human. This is one story. We are manifested from Satchidananda. We are made in a certain way. We have mothers, fathers, children's friends, masters, beloveds, because that's how it works. And this process cannot be dismissed as merely human or merely egoic or merely desire. Not at all. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to take what is natural to us and then keep elevating it. It's the nature of joy to want to share itself. So we keep just sharing, and we keep sharing, and we keep finding out what actually brings us happiness and what doesn't. And we begin to find out where the obstacles truly lie. And in this romantic story that Swami wrote, at first, meaning for all the bazillions of lifetimes, they keep thinking that the problem is you. If you were just different, then I would be different. I have had the wonderful experience of people explaining to me that really that person may have behaved badly, but the only reason they may have behaved badly is because I provoked them. So actually their bad behavior is actually my fault. It's just like, because I meet a lot of people and people talk to me, I get to watch the human drama in a very delightful. That's my favorite. I didn't really misbehave. It was you who provoked me. If you hadn't provoked me, then I wouldn't have been bad. Well, it's also true. I'm not saying that I didn't provoke them, but how is this going to help us? How are we going to learn to perfect ourselves? So Master tells us every time we pray, Father, Mother, Friend, this is the picture. But how can we do it in harmony with the divine? And this is what the practice of yoga is, to make some passing reference to the reading we had for today. This is what yoga is. And there's a nuance in here that's not explained, that Swami explains elsewhere. What the practice of yoga is, what is meant by what Krishna is saying here, is that we start with who we are and what we have. The practice of jnana understood in a certain way, is you repudiate the reality of this world. You're always neti. It's not this, it's not this. But that's a very, very hard path because we're living in a human body. We have all these human inclinations. We have all these deep longings. And we have to learn somehow. Yoga is, okay, start with who we are. Start with where we are. And then step by step, keep refining and elevating our experience over many incarnations through fulfillment and disappointment. We gradually begin to understand, oh, I see what I'm really wanting. I see what I really long for. And this is what I was saying yesterday. It's not that the things of this world are not lovely. Many of them are lovely. They're just not enough. Then the other difficulty is they're ephemeral. And we don't realize that at the beginning. But after we've been around for a while, and enough of our friends have gone to the astral world, and we're closer to the end than the beginning, which is how I think about myself. I don't think I'm on my last legs yet, but there's no question I'm closer to the end than the beginning. What have I learned? What can I take with me? What do I know? And why would we wait? Why would we waste all that time? But we can't extricate ourselves from our humanity, so we have to practice yoga. And what yoga is the science of union. How can I unify all these different aspects? My human self, my divine self, my aspirations, my desires. How do I just make it one beautiful story? When we asked Swamiji once, I asked him, what is the purpose of Ananda? His answer was to have fun. And it was just at a community meeting, and we all just burst out laughing. It seemed, we expected something a little grander than that. What is the purpose of Ananda? To have fun. Okay, we're having lots of fun. I guess we're doing it. And then he sort of made it a little more serious by saying, but what is fun for us? What is fun is to feel Divine Mother's presence, and the nature of joy is to want to share itself. So it is the purpose of life is to have fun, because the purpose of life is to feel joyful. But what makes us feel joyful? Even in the midst of the most difficult circumstances, there's never a time when the divine isn't present. And joy is not the same as ease and pleasure. I think sometimes of these really successful athletes who I remember one world-class athlete was talking about his program, and he talked about how he trained and what he did, and he said, every day. He said, Christmas, New Year's, my birthday, my children's birthday, every day. So it wasn't like it was always an enjoyable project to follow through on what his intention was. But the joy was that he knew where he was going, he knew why he was doing it, and he knew how to get there. And that's what the practice of yoga is. It's just, I know where I'm going, I know how to get there. I know what my attitude needs to be, and even when I am not fulfilling it, I haven't actually abandoned it. I've just merely failed to live up to it for a moment. I remember, let's see, what was the context? I remember once Swamiji was having extraordinary health problems. I don't know, it might have been during the time we were also being sued, and there was a whole lot of things going wrong all at the same time. And he went to the dentist, and he came back and he had no cavities. And I, trying to be humorous, sometimes I was very inappropriately so, I said, well, no cavities, thank the Lord for little favors. Just stupid joke. Swami, and he would do this sometimes when you needed to be corrected. He just would be very centered. And he said, I thank Divine Mother for everything she sends. Just such a small little comment, but why would you only thank God for His favors? And that's what we're working with. We're into being, like Yanamanta said, to being able to stand in a place where we know that Divine Mother is taking care of us. So if you send it, I want it. I may not enjoy it. I might not have chosen it. But if you send it, I want it. Once Swami Kriyananda was very ill with flu. He had a fever, and I don't know why, but for some reason he had a whole bunch of us there. I was reading to him out of some novel, and Shivani came in, and she comes over and she starts to walk up to greet Swami, and he says, don't get too close. I have the flu. She said, "Sir, you have it. I want it." Divine Mother, you give it. I want it. And now you have to help me to make good on that promise. But you see, this is what we're being asked to do. But wow, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful to have a clue as to how to find what we're longing for? I mean, that nothing compares to that. The freedom and the joy of that. So I always measure whatever I'm going through, whatever karma is on me, compared to how I felt before I found this path. And nothing that happens here, no matter how difficult it is, it matters compared to what it was like to just be at sea and not know. So even if, I'll say one last thing here. Master has that poem, I think it's God's Boatman, is that the one? No, it's the other one, where he says, "I will come back again and again, 1,000,000,000 times if necessary, over crags of suffering with bleeding feet, as long as one stray brother is left behind." Isn't that remarkable? So sometimes I think, okay, if that's me, I put it this way, I'm on the list. And I don't care where I am on the list, I'm on the list. And he's promised to take care of us. And if he has to cross crags of suffering, I'm kind of sorry about that, sir, but you made the promise and I'm going to hold you to it. Just really meditate on what that means. Sister Gyanamata wrote to Master, "I know you came for a great mission that Babaji and Jesus sent you." And this is what she wrote, "But I like to think you came just for me." And what's so sweet about that is that she knew that was the right attitude. Instead of thinking, because that's intimacy, that's the beloved, I like to think that you're here for me. In Krishna dancing with all the gopis, there was one Krishna, but all of a sudden every gopi was dancing with Krishna all by herself. I like to think you came for me. And you see, that's what the heart is longing for. God bless you.